Hallo und willkommen zurück zu Pretty Old Pixel. Mein Name ist Elmar und heute mal wieder mit einer Interviewfolge und zwar mit Damon Slye. Und wem der Name nicht sagt, hier kurz ein paar Eckdaten. Also Damon Slye hat 1983 schon damit angefangen, Stellar 7 zu programmieren, was glaube ich vielen schon ein Begriff ist. Mir eher von dem Remake, was dann später 1990, 91, 90 glaube ich, auf den Markt gekommen ist. Aber davon war ich nie so begeistert. Das erste Damon Slye-Spiel, was ich gespielt habe, war das MechWarrior oder die MechWarrior-Umsetzung für Activision, glaube ich. Und danach natürlich A10 Tank Killer und Aces of the Pacific, Aces over Europe, Red Baron und so weiter. Sind alles Spiele, bei denen Damon Slye mit dabei war, mitgearbeitet hat, aber hauptsächlich hat er halt Dynamix mitgegründet und war ja Co-Founder von Dynamix und hat jetzt ein neues Studio, was Villager and Heroes im Mystical Land produziert und das nennt sich Mad Otter Games. Und ihr kennt mich ja, ich hatte ja auch in den anderen Interviews nie die Interviewfragen, die andere schon gemacht haben. Ich versuche das immer da redundant wegzulassen und immer neue Fragen und interessantere Fragen zu haben. Darum sind das hier alles ein paar Fragen, die vielleicht erstmal so keinen Sinn machen, aber mich interessiert haben und wo ich gedacht habe, wo ihr vielleicht auch großes Interesse dran habt, die zu hören. Ja, Video gibt es am Ende, da sprechen wir über Damons Big Box Sammlung und so. Da gibt es im Video dann ein Bild von seiner Big Box Sammlung, die er mir geschickt hat. Da könnt ihr dann, wenn darüber gesprochen wird, in das Video mal reinschauen. Ansonsten gibt es Aces of the Pacific im Hintergrund und ein, zwei Bildchen mal zu spielen, über die wir sprechen. Aber das, also es lohnt sich nicht, das Video anzugucken, sondern könnt ihr im Hintergrund liegen lassen. Die anderen Interviews, über die ich gesprochen habe, zwei der wichtigsten, eins vom Retro-Kompott, wo ich bei den Fragen mitgewirkt habe, da mache ich die Links in die Videobeschreibung. Wahrscheinlich macht es Sinn, die erst zu gucken, wenn euch die Hintergrundgeschichte und so von Damon Slye interessiert. Ansonsten wünsche ich euch viel Spaß und möchte noch sagen, verzeiht mir so ein bisschen den Fanboy. Ja, viel Spaß. I'm very honored to have the opportunity to interview Damon Slye, the founder of Dynamix or co-founder of Dynamix and co-founder of Mad Otter Games, right?
Yes. Hi, how are you?
Hi, yeah, I'm very good, thank you. And you?
I'm good. Things are going well.
Yeah, perfect. For you, of course, it's in the morning. For me, it's a bit late, so you're in a slight advantage.
Yes, exactly.
It's some kind of a tradition to ask the interviewee about their computer history. So, what was your first home computer, where it all started, and what was your most beloved one, and did you still have them?
I don't still have, I got rid of them a long time ago. I wish I had kept, my first computer was an Apple II.
Hmm?
The first computer I really worked on was a Commodore PET in high school. The physics teacher had one, and it had only 8K, but I wrote some games on it in high school, and it was fun. But that's when I fell in love with computers, and so I spent money on an Apple II when I was a kid. Well, I was probably maybe 18, and I bought an Apple II, and I just wanted to program.
Mm-hmm.
And my parents thought it was a bad idea because I should save all my money for college.
Oh, yeah, I
But
know that.
they're like, oh, that's just games and stuff. What are you doing with that thing? Probably still, I mean, obviously, if I had to use a computer today, I'm going to pick a modern computer. But just in terms of my history, I really liked working on the Apple II. It was a really neat computer in a lot of ways.
I think the Apple II was also kind of revolution for computing or for manufacturing because we here in Germany we didn't had any Apple II, at least that I know of. None of my friends had them, so we all started with Commodore machines. So yeah, Apple was always this kind of a magical machine for us.
Yeah, it was the precursor to the Commodore. and it had color graphics and stuff like that, so it was really neat. And it had the same chip, the 6502,
Mm-hmm.
so it was pretty easy to switch over to the Commodore 64 at some point to program for that one.
And when you started discovering computer and computer games, do you still remember what was your first game, what you ever played?
Oh, that I played. It was probably, well, I mean, so the first game I played was probably called Apple Trek, which was a Star Trek game
Hmm.
that I think used to actually run on teletypes before it was on the Apple. You know, because it would print out the position of all the ships. So you had the Enterprise, and there would be these Klingon ships that would come around you, and it was sort of turn-based where you'd fire a photon torpedo and stuff like that. But you could probably Google it. It was like one of the first games that was around. It was called Apple Trek, or Star. It was probably called Star Trek originally. You know, I played games like Snake Bite, you know, and there was another weird one I played for a while, Temple of Upshai. That was sort of an adventure game. Then there was all these teletype games. I used to be on a teletype in junior high, so you played games like Hunt the Wumpus and stuff like that. They were really simple games, you know.
Yeah, I think my first games were also this very simple Atari 2600 games. They were also very simple, but we had a lot of fun.
Yeah, consoles. Yeah. I mean, arcade games. I remember there was one in the arcades called Berserk that was really fun, where you had this guy who was trying to escape from a lab with monsters. And it was one of the first games that had like a graphic screen on it, you know. It's sort of like the same time as Pong, just a little after Pong came out.
When you think back of the games you played, or maybe even created, or can you pick 3 or 4 that are your favorite?
Yeah, I think maybe one that I really loved was called Cytron Masters. Have you heard of that game?
No.
Do you know the game developer Dan Bunton?
Yeah.
Yeah, so he did Mule, and later he changed his name to, I think, Danny Bunton or something. But, but he made this game called Cytron Masters, which was on the Apple II, but it was basically the first real-time strategy game ever created. And people don't recognize it as a real-time strategy game, which is unfortunate. But it really was the first one. So that, I mean, what an amazing game designer, just coming up with all these amazing, creating genres out of nowhere. And so I played it, and it was fun. You'd play it single player against the computer. But I mean, really, it was really crude, but it was a real-time strategy game. It had all the core elements of a real-time strategy game. So that one was a lot of fun. And then, I don't know, Doom was neat. I remember we liked Doom when it first came out. Doom and Half-Life, those games. Man, there's so many games. I guess Warcraft, the real-time strategy Warcraft was really good. I think it was probably Warcraft 2 that I played more than Warcraft 1.
Yeah, me too.
Not the MMO, but the RTS. Yeah. Oh, Command and Conquer. I love that game. That was really fun. That was a great game. Yeah, I really like Command and Conquer. They're all so good. All these games, you know.
Yeah. So you would more say your favorite genre is real-time strategy?
No, I don't think so. It's funny, I don't really play them anymore. I don't really know that I have a favorite genre. It's like you get into a game, and if it's really immersive and you like the gameplay, then it just works really well, you know. I remember I loved Half-Life and Half-Life 2. Those were really immersive and fun, but then I was done and I never played them again, you know. Chess is probably my favorite game. I play a lot of chess.
Oh, right. Interesting, because we last week we had a discussion about chess and Go and similarities, and who liked Go and who liked chess more. It's yeah, because these games are big replay value, I think. More replay value than Dune or Command Conquer or something like that.
For sure. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. After we talked about real-time strategy games, my favorite genre is flight simulators, especially the ones from the late 80s, early 90s, and I always think of the Aces of the Pacific family very fondly because Aces of the Pacific was the first game I bought when I got my 386, and I was, I think, 13 or 14 and didn't have enough money. So two friends of mine, we all sat together and got our allowances together and bought Aces. And then we split up the box. One got the discs, one got the manual, and the other one got the box. And we shared them on the schoolyard and stuff like that. Very fond memories. And I don't know why, but I always come back to Aces and play the games. And
That's a good story.
Yeah, the question is, you had the Agent David Wolf game, I think, before, and the M1 Abrams games before, and of course Stellar 7, and were always ground-based games, except David Wolf had some kind of a flight simulation part. So we were always wondering where the idea for a flight sim came from. Was it just because you had so much fun with David Wolf and the flight sim part, or was it just because flight sims were very popular in the late 80s and that was pure marketing decision?
It was, I guess, it was kind of both. It was personal interest and business decision both. So I had started off doing tank simulations with Stellar 7 because it was a lot easier to do. The math was simpler because you only have to rotate about one axis, and you couldn't have done a good flight sim on the Apple II. So I started off doing tank simulations, kind of actually inspired by the board games by Steve Jackson. He made little board games like Ogre and GEV and stuff like that. And so I had started on that path when we were working with Electronic Arts back then. I mean, not during Stellar 7, but later, like with Abrams Battle Tank. And so the flight sims always did better in terms of business than the tank simulations. People tried to do well with tank simulations, and back then they never did as well as flight simulations. And so it made sense to do a flight simulation for a business reason, just because the sales are higher, but also just because it was interesting to me, the challenges of doing a good flight simulator. And so the first one we did was, of course, A-10 Tank Killer. And it wasn't really related to David Wolf. The thing in David Wolf was there was a hang gliding simulation that I designed that I just thought was interesting. It was kind of based on those. There was a James Bond movie where they hang glide in on some cliffs or whatever, and it just was kind of neat, and their hang gliders had machine guns and stuff, so it was kind of neat because we were trying to do sort of a secret agent thing. But really, it was more just wanting to get into flight simulation and having a background in doing 3D simulation already, having done all the tank games, and realizing that we really couldn't keep making those games because they weren't selling well enough, or they weren't selling nearly as well as the flight sims. And so that's why we decided to do A-10 Tank Killer. And we picked the A-10 because it was very different than all the F-16 jet sims that were out there. And it was down low on the ground. It seemed more interesting. And that's sort of how we got into that's how I got into wanting to do flight simulation in the first place, was really A-10 Tank Killer.
Interesting. If I remember correctly, you have a pilot license, did you?
Yeah, I got one later after I left Dynamix. I ended up getting my pilot's license and flying a lot, which I ended up loving. And that was, of course, because I had made all these flight sims. So I wanted to know what it was like, what it was like. And when I first started, I thought, because I had played flight games, I figured, I'll do all these aerobatic maneuvers and stuff, just like you do in the game. I know how to do them all, But once I got my pilot's license, I'm like, no, that's crazy.
That's dangerous.
Yeah.
No loading in real life. Yeah.
I mean, I probably could have done a roll. I think a roll is fairly safe, but still, I never did a roll. I never banked more than 60 degrees over, I think probably was the max you normally bank. So I was like, no, this is crazy. I mean, a loop you couldn't do. That's really hard, but you could probably do a roll in any of these small planes. So But no, I thought that's crazy. So, and then I liked it for different reasons. I liked it not for doing aerobatics, but just the challenge of flight. It's just really fun.
Yeah.
It's pretty exciting.
I personally think that the dynamic simulations were always a bit different from the competitor, at least the ones till, let's say, Aces over Europe. And by competitors, I think of Microprose and Spectrum Holobyte. I think they had always more flair. They were, for me at least, more immersive. For example, when I'm playing Red Baron, I always have to think of the Roger Corman movie, The Red Baron. Or when I play Aces of the Pacific, I always think of Black Sheep. Do you know the series or the movie?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Finally, we were able to play with the main characters from the TV show in Aces of the Pacific, of the Black Sheep Squadron TV show, and we were so thrilled to find out that was by pure accident. We picked the right campaign and the right airplane and had the chance to play and fly there. It was very, very immersive. So it's not about the historical background of the simulation. It's more of the look and feel of the simulation and the air combat. Did you had any inspirations from movies or novels or stuff like that?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So yeah, one of the things I learned along the way was the founder of Electronic Arts. His name was Trip Hawkins,
Mm-hmm.
and he was more of a marketing guy, but he was a real smart, charismatic leader of that company at the time. And he was sort of a good teacher in a way. He said that we need to look beyond the small niche at the time of games and look to the broader market of entertainment in general and really understand, what do people like? What do people like? He would have phrases like real life in a box, So you're taking real life experiences and you're putting them on a computer. And he would say things like, go down to the magazine rack at the store back when we used to have magazine racks, and look at all the magazines on the shelf and see what things people are interested in. But basically, trying to look, instead of just copying other games, try to look at all of culture and figuring out what are the things people are interested in. And so I think that was a good lesson for me. And so when I would do research for a game, I would look at everything. So not only looking at all the other games on the market. So I was inspired by all of those games that you mentioned, by all those competitors, Microprose, by also the games by Lawrence Holland, Their Finest Hour.
LucasArts.
LucasArts, yeah. And but also movies. I watched every movie I could find on World War One. So I watched them all. There was the Blue Max. That was a great movie with George Papard, and just to sort of totally understand and immerse in that era on every level. And of course, the other thing was to not make it strictly a flight simulator, but also a historical simulator. So, and also it's about the people. You're also trying to model the personalities of the different pilots and things like that. So we were really trying to do something that was a lot more immersive. But yeah, I think you're right. That was a big part of it. The role playing and the background and the story and the flair, and even more like trying to get the music right. That sounds authentic to the period. So, Red Baron had music that felt really sort of, I don't know, around that era, sort of classical and romantic. And then later on, when we did Aces of the Pacific, we tried to have some of the more big band style, also with all the artwork and things like that.
Yeah. Definitely worked for me. You mentioned the competitors. Did you ever meet up at a what's it called, Computer Developer Conference?
Yeah, I met Gilman Louis. He was the F-16 guy, or Falcon 3.0 guy, Gilman Louis. And I met Wild Bill Steely at some things. We did an interview on a show together, Computer Chronicles. and I met him a couple times. I never met Sid Meier. I would have liked to meet him because I think he was actually the one that really built a lot of the best games at Microprose. And then he left simulations after a while. He did their first simulations, but then he got interested in other things. But I felt like his design sensibilities were better, and he added, like, they had some kind of role-playing aspects in some of the Microprose games that was nice. I mean, not quite to the same level or whatever, but I liked the stuff that he did. Well, because he had done games like Pirates and stuff like that. And, we wanted to get, like I didn't want to go down the road of Falcon 3.0, but I did want to have this simulation part as accurate as possible, but not have it be that's like the entire focus of the game. That's just one part of it. Because again, we weren't as interested in simulating the aircraft. I mean, we wanted to get that right, but we wanted to simulate the experience of the pilot. Like, in other words, trying to simulate what basically it's like a historical time machine, instead of just a simulator that you could sit in, So that was sort of the focus.
Yeah, I think that design philosophy got lost when I look at actual simulators like DCS or Microsoft Flight Simulator. They are very, very dry, very systematic. It's all about the vehicle, not about the immersion and the stuff around it that makes it interesting. And the other day I had an interesting discussion with a friend of mine who always liked to play these farming simulators. And I don't understand that because I'm from a farm. And with the farming simulator, you simulate the boring part of farming. That's driving a tractor around a field the whole day. The interesting part of farming is when something breaks, when, I don't know, sheep got away and you have to catch them and you help your neighbor and stuff like that. That's the interesting part. No one simulates that. So I think the interesting part is always around the vehicle and not the vehicle only.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the vehicle's nice and it's nice to have that part be accurate, but there's so much more, and it's so much more interesting if you get all of it going,
Yeah.
I mean, when we were doing the research for Red Baron, we started learning about all the pilots, and they were such interesting people. Journals that they wrote during the war, and just the things they were talking about, and just they all had really different personalities. And their personalities affected the way they flew, the kinds of maneuvers they would do, and the kind of risks taking that they would take. And it just was fascinating, that whole part of it,
Mm-hmm.
It was really neat.
I think you left Dynamix shortly before Aces Over Europe got finished, right?
It was after Aces Over Europe was released by maybe a few months, I think. That was my last project, was Aces Over Europe, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I read in an interview from, I don't know, 93 or so in the computer gaming world, there were talks about an East Front add-on for Aces Over Europe, and I was asking myself, did you had a plan for more games? And I'm not talking about Aces of the Deep. More games maybe Aces Over Korea or stuff like that?
Yeah, that was the plan, to do some other eras. Korea was always one we talked about a lot, just because it was the dawn of jet combat.
Mm-hmm.
We would have eventually done it. I don't think it would have done as well. It might have done well, actually. If we'd really done it right, it could have been pretty cool. It's a little bit narrow because there were only a couple planes that were that interesting,
Yeah.
Or main. It's not like during World War I and World War II, you kept having new aircraft introduced that were superior to the old versions, but in Korea it was a lot more static in terms of the technology. But we thought about doing Korea, and the other thing would have been just to go back and start over again and do the next Red Baron, then do the next Aces of the Pacific, and upgrade them for the technology, but also design improvements and things like that as well. I think a big one would have been adding multiplayer in. I mean, I know Red Baron 2 and Red Baron 3D did that a little bit, but that's probably would have been I'm not sure which I would have done first. If I would have like done Korea and then did modern jets, or gone back to World War One again and make new versions of them all.
Mm.
In retrospect, I think going back would have been smarter because the computer technology was just getting a lot better, and you could do a lot more with designs in the next iteration.
There's still time. I would buy it.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Well, we actually have the Red Baron
Yeah.
rights now. It's strange, but we haven't been able to get something built, so it's just sort of sitting there waiting for the right opportunity.
Yeah, and me too.
Cool. Yeah.
I would like to talk a little bit about technical stuff. In an interview, you described, I don't know, cross-platform compiler. So if I remember correctly, you would create code on Unix or something like that, and then you could easily port it to other systems.
Yeah, I think it really started with Arctic Fox was a game, Electronic Arts, or they had funded it. And so we wanted to port it over to the Apple II and the Commodore 64 because the Amiga wasn't selling well, and but the Commodore 64 games were selling really well, and we also wanted to port it to the PC. And so we had this challenge, which is how do you port this code over? And so I came up with the idea of building what I was calling a virtual machine, which today you would basically call it a platform layer. And so it's basically a layer that handles all of the things for the computer. So input and output, so sounds, graphics, and then inputs, keyboard, mouse. And so if you build a platform layer and the API is the same, and this was before we knew words like API, but basically if the interface was the same, then the game code wouldn't have to change, and it would just run on any computer that we built a virtual machine for. And so that was the idea. And so that was something that we did at Dynamix, and it was really successful because then we ended up being able to port our games to different platforms, which was important for a while. Eventually, it didn't matter as much because everything was on the PC. But for a while, there was a period when you had the Apple II, the Commodore 64, the Amiga, the Atari, and and of course, I don't remember which one. I didn't say the Amiga, the PC. Anyway, there was like 5 machines for a while, and you'd want to release on all of them at the time because no one had won yet. Eventually, the PC won, and all the other computers were pretty much irrelevant for games, and so you could ignore them. But that we had this idea of the virtual machine, and it was just these low-level technologies.
Sounds a little bit like Java.
Yeah. I mean, nowadays there's game engines that do this for you, where they'll run on different, they'll run on a Mac or a PC or even mobile. But it's a good strategy for a company to have.
Yeah. When you port the games over, you had to obviously convert graphics and stuff like that. And Dynamix, I think, was one of the first companies that started using digitized photos or images. Did you know how it started? Did you just took an analog picture and scanned it? I think I saw the big drum scanners where you could put in pictures, and they had a very good resolution. Or were there even digicams around?
So there were scanners. I don't think there were digicams back then or at least that we had. So we would take photographs, just with a normal camera, and then we would digitize them. And that was the strategy we used. We even did things where we would take a videotape, and we would. So for instance, in the game we built for Electronic Arts, Project Firestart, there's a guy that runs around. Well, we rotoscoped him, where we took a video of a guy running, from the side with a camera, and then we basically drew over him with D-Paint. So we basically hand rotoscoped him so the animation looked good. So basically you're doing whatever you could do to solve these problems because they hadn't been formally solved yet. You just grab whatever was around and try to figure out, well, how can we do this? How can we do this? So that was the deal with digitizing, and that of course lended itself better to adventure games, graphical adventure games, more than flight sims. But we use them too, obviously, like in
A10.
Red Baron, there was photographs and stuff of pilots.
Yeah, it was very impressive at the time, for us at least. If you had an Amiga or VGA PC, not so much with 8-bit machines. Yeah,
it wasn't as good, especially like on CGA where it's 4-color.
Oh yeah, CGA is.
But we did it. We did it. We had them, but they just didn't look very good. Yeah, it was pink and blue and black and white. It was pretty bad.
Yeah. While we're at the topic of colors, I always was wondering why Dynamix games, especially in VGA but also in EGA, looked differently. I don't know. I'm not sure what it was. It was more cinematic, more warmer, more pleasing than the Microprose or Whole-Byte Spectrum ones. I don't know why. Was it some kind of Dynamix magic, or did you had some perfect palette combinations or stuff like that?
Yeah, I think, well, there's a couple different factors. So the first one is that we were the first company to use VGA with the full 256 color palette. Microprose said they did it, but they were really only using 16 colors out of the palette, you know? And so what they did was the cockpit would be 256 colors, but the 3D world was only 16 colors out of the palette. So we did the full 256, and we spent a lot of time. I even spent time myself. I'm not really an artist, but I would scan photographs of fields, you know, like from magazines, like a field of grass or whatever, and trying to get the colors right, the RGB right, you know, so it really looked naturalistic. So it looked like a real earth tone. There'd be like, different kinds of fields, grass, you know, forest, things like that, trying to get the colors right to give it that sort of authentic look. And so we had an advantage for maybe a year where we were the only company that was coming out with full 256 color games on VGA. And I don't really know why we got ahead of everybody, but there was a period where we were sort of ahead of everyone on VGA. And the other thing was we added Garou shading, which basically is depending on how much the face is facing the camera, it lights it differently. So there were just some little tricks like that. We were always looking for whatever thing we could do to make it look more realistic that was possible on the computers, you know. So there was that. And then the other thing I would say was sort of I had started, you know, with Stellar 7, which was more of a arcade game, and so there's a big emphasis on the shapes and the way the shapes look. And some of the other simulators didn't start from there, and so they had a different look. Like they had a lot more lines. Like if you were up in the air and say, I don't know, F-117 stealth or whatever, you'd see a lot of stuff on the ground, little dots and lines and things like that. And it probably looks pretty accurate in terms of if you're at a really high altitude or whatever. But then we were emphasized more like if you're up close on an airplane, it looks really good, you know. So that might have been a little bit of it too, just sort of a different aesthetic. And I'm not saying our aesthetic was in that regard was better. It was just a different approach. There's other weird things you have to do. Like for instance, the human eye is really precise and the human eye has really high resolution, whereas the computer screen didn't at the time. You know, you'd be lucky to have like 640 by 480 back then, and so if you're actually simulating the size of the aircraft accurately, it would be smaller than a pixel normally during dogfighting. Well, a human eye can pick that up and they can see all the details of another airplane. But on a computer, it's just a pixel. So you have to think about, well, now the game's just going to look bad. You're just going to have these little pixels moving around, when you're dogfighting, and that's not fun. And so you have to do things like basically you make the airplanes bigger than they would be in real life to make it look right to the human eye. So in other words, in some ways, to make it more accurate for the human mind, you have to make it less accurate with the actual technical details on the computer. But I think it's a more accurate simulation for what the human's going through, the human's mind, as opposed to what's actually happening on the computer, because it's like, no, that airplane is too big on the screen. It would not be that big in the frame. But if you made it small, you couldn't pick up all the details. So I think it's more accurate for human perception. So anyway, that's sort of a long-winded explanation of all the kinds of things we were thinking about at the time.
Yeah, but it paid off, definitively.
Yeah, I mean, we loved it. It was so fun. It was fun making those games.
Yeah, and that shines through. I think that shines through. I like micropro simulations, but I'm always with Dynamix ones, so I don't know. I think it's all part of this more immersive gameplay than realistic gameplay. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah.
The last question is a little bit odd and more technically from a legal standpoint, I think. I think Dynamix did the only good Die Hard game back then. I know you weren't really involved with that, right?
Yeah, I didn't work on Die Hard.
But do you remember how you got the license from I think it's Fox or sounds like an interesting story.
Yeah, well, so we had left Electronic Arts for a lot of reasons, and we had switched over to work with Activision. And in our deal with Activision, they helped us get out of our thing with Electronic Arts. And so in our deal with Activision, we agreed to build 5 games for them and then 2 games as affiliate publisher. So the 2 games that we built for ourselves were A-10 Tank Killer and David Wolf. But then 5 games that they wanted built, and one of them was Die Hard. I think the other was Mech Warrior, V-22 Osprey, which I don't think ever shipped, Death Track, and then Ghostbusters, I think. So Activision was the ones who had got the license to Die Hard. So that's how that started. They had got the license. They had acquired the license because they were a big company and they could do things like that. And so they said, hey, will you build this Die Hard? And we said, sure. So that's kind of how that came about because, like, you're right, we weren't really in a position where we were in Hollywood. For instance, we thought, well, we should get a license to have Bruce Willis, right? So we got the license to Die Hard, but not for Bruce Willis. Did Bruce Willis's agent, and he laughed at us and he said, Bruce Willis bed for less than $100,000. So we're like, okay, we can't afford Bruce Willis. So we had to make sure the guy didn't Willis, or we would get sued. So it's funny, we had the license to Die Hard, but I mean it was all through Activision, really. So
yeah.
And we never really pushed too much on licenses. I mean that was a Electronic Arts thing, and any money you spend on a license is money that you can't spend. And we were always more product development focused than we were marketing focused. So I mean I was whatever, but usually given a choice, I'm going to choose to put the money into the development budget and not into the marketing.
Yeah, I think that's the only licensed game except maybe Mech Warrior. All the other games Dynamix did, I think, were non-licensed. They also started later after you left the Earth Siege series and stuff like that. That's a direct competitor to Mech Warrior, I think. So, yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, the Mech Warrior license. The Mech Warrior license was good though because we actually got a lot of design stuff with it, right? Because it was a game, and so we could use all the design that they had done. So there was product images for it because they had really worked out the details of game balance with the different mechs and stuff like that. So license stuff, I can't remember. Oh, Betrayal at Krondor was
Oh,
licensed
right.
off of a book.
Yeah.
But the advantage again there was we got all the source material that he had written, all the story and stuff. So you're getting more than just a name. You're getting, like, say if you're getting Bruce Willis, all you're doing is you're just helping sell more copies. It doesn't make the game better. I
Mm.
mean, other than if you think, well, having his picture makes the game better, but the gameplay is not any better. It's just so I think it's if you get a license like that, it's even better because you're actually making the game better because the design's better. So that was one of the reasons for getting Betrayal at Krondor because he wasn't super expensive because it wasn't like Lord of the Rings where it would be a super expensive license. So we're getting all this source material from his books. So to me, those are kind of the best licenses where you get both.
Yeah. By Bruce Willis, you only get a face. By a
Yeah,
novel, you get a universe, right?
exactly. Yeah, right. Exactly. Well said.
To close off the interview, I have some more maybe philosophical questions. I don't know. In one of your more recent interviews, I could see a shelf in the background, and it looked like there were books, but I'm pretty sure I spotted some Aces games back there. Did you still have them and get them out from time to time to give them a try?
Yeah, I still have them. I sort of have all these boxes of a lot of the games at the time that I played. It wasn't just ours. So, in fact, maybe after the interview, if you want, I can send you a photograph of my bookshelf
Yeah,
of all
sure.
the games, and you can.
I would include it in the video if you
Okay, cool.
are okay with
Yeah,
it.
for sure.
Cool, thank you.
So yeah, it's kind of other games I see that I liked, like Icewind Dale. I remember I liked those games too. The Baldur's Gate, Icewind Dale, and stuff. Um, I
Black
see
Isle
Warcraft.
Studio, Interplay.
Yeah, another MMOs. I've got Camelot, EverQuest, StarCraft, Warcraft 2, Civilization, Populous, Secret Weapons of the Luftwaffe, The Sims. Anyway, yeah. So I just
The
kind of keep
Sims.
them there. Yeah, yeah. I have them there. I don't really open them up very often now, and plus you need an emulator for most of these games at this
Mhm.
point. So yeah. Well, I guess the way you play them now is you go to good old games and see if they have a copy of it.
Yeah. Okay. Um, I recently followed a discussion from one of the newly formed micropros, and they were talking about it was some kind of a flight action simulator, but with very vector graphics look. I think there weren't even textures on the planes and on the landscape and stuff like that. And they were wondering and talking about why you couldn't just imitate the look and feel from late 80s early 90s game, that they just don't work today because they were coming up with all these things we also talked a little bit about, of pixel density, resolutions, pop-ins, level of detail and stuff like that. But I thought they were totally missing the point, because the simulations back then were immersive because we had to fill the gaps between the 230 by 240 pixel resolutions with our imagination, and we didn't need to have the vehicles and stuff like look realistic. We could imagine what they will be looking because we had manuals and stuff like that, and even history books. So my question is, do you think the player today got too lazy, or maybe unlearned to really immerse themselves into a, maybe not just a game, maybe even a movie or a book?
Yeah, yeah, I think you're onto something there. I mean, I think it's a thing of art of it's if you're a good artist, then you're really aware of what the viewer's bringing to the viewing of the art. So I think about there's a famous vase from the Greeks way back in, I don't know what, 400 BC or something. It was during the red vase period, where it was a picture on a vase of two warriors playing dice together. It was called Ajax and Achilles playing dice on a vase, and it was them just sitting in their tent. And what was brilliant about it was that the artist knew that everyone that would see the vase knew the story. And the story was, while they were playing dice, it looks like a really boring shot, that their armies were being ambushed and killed, but they didn't know it, the two warriors. And so it added all this drama. And so basically it's what you're getting at, which is the viewer is filling in all the details that create the drama, because the shot itself is very sitting there playing dice together. But then the viewer looks at it and they say, oh, but all this stuff's happening, you know? So I think that's cool. And I think that's true, that it has a lot to do with what the viewers brings to it. And I think in general, if you look at movies right now, the movies and TV shows that are really interesting are the ones where they really make the viewer's mind work to fill in the details, and they'll actually leave stuff out so that you have to figure out what's going on. Why would he say that, or what's that about, you know, as opposed to just spelling it out, you know, ABC, because that's just boring if they just spell everything out, you know. That's like lazy writing, and it's not very interesting. And so but I think the thing about the graphics, I mean, I think the one thing that's hard to get around is games tend to not sell as well today if they don't look really shiny and polished. So that's sort of the challenge designers have. Whereas if they don't look really good, then people just don't buy them, you know. And so it's like a movie, you know, like it's hard to make like a small indie movie that doesn't look great, that doesn't have high production values, and then have it do well. I mean, even if it's a really good screenplay. I mean, then sometimes movies overcome that and they do well anyway, and that's always really exciting to see. But that's why you have all these movies that have these huge budgets, you know, millions of dollars, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars for production, and you go to it and it doesn't make any sense and it's boring.
Yeah.
You know, it's really stupid. But it's like, wow, why didn't they have a good writer, you know? Why didn't they get a good screenwriter? Why didn't they first get the screenplay good before they spent hundreds of millions of dollars? But it's because they know that for the audience, so much of the audience just cares about the way it looks, you know, because they have to look good in a trailer and a teaser. And they're like, well, if we have good trailers and teasers, who cares what the screenplay is, you know? So I think that's the challenge. And I think it affects games as well. So, I mean, you can have a really great game, and if it doesn't look good, it might not sell, which is really too bad, you know. You have to, in that case, then you have to be able to find your audience anyway, you know, and then you have to rely on word of mouth, but it's slower, and you don't have this big launch with lots of users. So I think that's the challenge. And of course, all that really fancy graphic stuff is expensive. And so again, it's kind of like, well, now you're spending a lot of your budget on just making the game look good and not spending it on play balance and making it fun, you know? So ideally, the big studios do both, you know, but sometimes they just do one and not the other.
Yeah, you're right. Maybe it's just us. I don't know. I don't understand the more younger generation. So maybe it's just us. I don't know.
Yeah, well, there's some people that like the simpler art styles too. There's even a movement with some games where they're moving back to it, you know. And games are doing well. Have you heard of the game called Stardew Valley?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, okay. So that's a game that has a very simple art style, but the gameplay is pretty deep, and so people like that. I mean,
yeah, like Terraria, Minecraft, and they are all very simplistic, but they do things other games couldn't. So
yeah.
Cool.
It's almost like that look now says, well, we have better gameplay because look, our art's more simple. You know?
That would be a very interesting marketing slogan.
Yeah, we spent all our money on the gameplay.
Yeah. Yeah, so my last question ties into this a little bit. When I look at games nowadays, it's all about the RTX ray tracing stuff. And of course, there aren't so many revolutions or evolutionary steps from 2010 to 2020 as they were from, let's say, 85 to 95. But when I look at graphics and I see these comparison from NVIDIA, RTX off and RTX on, and I look at them and think, yeah, maybe if I look very closely, I see a difference. But I think even the graphics are at a point where it's hard to impress the customer or players. So I'm wondering if there are any fields you would like to see where we make a gap. For me, AI, for instance, I have a problem with most of the AI in computer games because they are just fill in the gaps for, like in a shooting gallery. Most of the FPS games are, even for multiplayer or for single player, they are just like in a shooting gallery, standing there and running through a door one by one, and no one of the AI is wondering, there are lying 4 of my comrades before me. Maybe I shouldn't step through that door, but no, they are running out through the door. So I was wondering if you have some fields where you would like to have a technological leap in the future.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. It's AI, and it's specifically machine learning now with the basically the neural networks. They're working now. Like for a long time, AI research in academia wasn't going anywhere, but now with this new machine learning, with these basically reinforcement learning, it's highly successful. I think you look at like Alpha Zero and Alpha Go, how well they play chess, like beyond even the machine versions from before them. I mean, so I'm a chess player, and you look at Alpha Zero play chess. It plays like a human, but a perfect human. It doesn't play like a computer. It plays beautiful chess where you're just like everything's in harmony. And so I think reinforcement learning is really powerful, and it's going to certainly come into games more and more. And so the obvious thing is it's going to make the NPCs, the computer-controlled characters, a lot more intelligent. But then the other thing is, well, what else is it going to do besides that? It's probably going to do other things, basically like predicting player behaviors and things like that to make the game more interesting.
Yeah, or sell more microtransactions and DLCs.
Well, yeah, actually that too. Figuring out how to maximize profits, that will certainly be sort of the dark side of that too.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I think machine learning will be a big one. I mean, it'll be the point of where they'll be too powerful. Like if you played a shooter against one of these bots, you would never stand a chance. It would just annihilate you. There would be, just like in the real world, if you had robot soldiers, human soldiers wouldn't have a chance.
Yeah.
They have perfect aim and but perfect strategy where it knows where you'll be just based on predicting your behaviors and stuff like that. But see, then that's where it gets interesting. Then the strategy is, how do you make it so it's not playing like a bot, it's playing like a human with flaws and things like that. Then it becomes an interesting design challenge. Like say trying to make the pilots accurate to the way they were in history, based on a model of what their personalities were like.
Yeah.
That would be cool.
Yeah, that would be really cool.
Yeah. I think that's more because there's not as far to go with graphics anymore right now,
No, I think maybe some more realistic or more intuitive physics, more destruction, and maybe wind or stuff like that will enhance the gameplay. But yeah, it's more about reflections and global illuminations, I think.
Yeah, stuff like that. But I know what you mean. Like we added ambient inclusion to the game I'm working on now, and it didn't make that much difference. It's like, it's just slightly more realistic having ambient inclusion on it,
Yeah, I think it's a big part is we are so familiar with the fake global illumination that we didn't see any difference.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so that's the end of my questions. I'm very honored to have the opportunity to talk to you, and thank you for that.
Well, thank you. It was fun. I always like talking about all these things that I haven't thought about in years,
Very good. So I come back with another set of questions next time.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, if you want to do it again sometime, that's fine. And I'll send
Yeah,
you a photograph of my shelf too.
yeah, please do. And if you ever build an Aces of the Pacific tour or something like that, let me know.
Will do. Definitely. I would definitely let you know for sure.
Okay, thank you for the interview and have a nice day.
All right. Well, have a nice evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.